I'm not really an epoxy primer guy because typically epoxy primer is for when you're doing a project and you want to prime it because it's gonna be, you know, bare metal or something like that for a long period of time. And you know the main thing you're looking for is this word right here: seal. Your primer needs to also be a sealer. So that's why people epoxy prime. They'll like sandblast something because it's all sandblasted down, and then epoxy prime it because of that word right there. Primer is not usually sealer. Um, so, like if you look at most of them, they say surfacer. So it doesn't say sealer. It just says primer surfacer. But this one's what's cool about this 2K epoxy prime from PCL is it's also a surfacer. So what I've heard about epoxy primer, because I don't use it much, one of the things that I don't like about it from what I've heard, and I don't use it because I'm when I do a project, it's tore down within a few days. It's inside. It's to paint skate. Not long. It's not long before I get to paint. It's not going to be a year sitting there and going in and outside and all that stuff. I'm not doing that kind of restoration. So the guys who are, um, they love epoxy primer for that reason because it seals and will keep the rust from coming. So for what it does, it actually does everything it says on the label right here. It does epoxy prime and seal. So I've had a project that I'm working on that, and it goes a long ways. 2 Volkswagen Bugs that did this 1 gallon, pretty much did everything on both 2 coats. So it was actually pretty good. The thing I really liked about it is after using it, used the whole gallon. So is that the surfacer part of it. After 3 days, I'm not going to tell you to. I mean, and this is in more than 70-degree weather, so I'm going to say probably if you're if you warm up to 80 every day, um, then that's what I'm talking about when I say 3 days. It might be longer if you're Midwest or something like that where it gets cold, and probably weeks. You have to leave it, to let it dry. But after 3 normal days for me, um, I was able to get a pretty good surfacer out of this as well. So, okay, let me talk to you real quick about that because a lot of people get this misrepresented. They say, oh, epoxy primer, once it's on there, it's sealed. But as soon as you sand it, it is open. Like any paint, as soon as you sand it, it's open. So it's not sealing anymore. So if you leave something outside that's sanded, then you're going to have problems. So generally, what guys are doing is they're sanding panels at a time, getting preparation, doing body work, sanding, and then recoating it with generally a surfacer. But then again, it's open again, so they better get their job done. Some guys let it set too long. So what I do what I use this for, and the reason I use this product is I did my body work, and then I painted this over the body work. People go, "What? You don't put your sealer, your epoxy prime underneath your body work because it's supposed to seal it and keep the rust from coming through." Well, I don't. Okay, and again, when I back up for a second, once you sand it, it's open. Okay, so if you sand it and then you put Bondo over it, it's open and then rust can come. So if the Bondo doesn't have sealer over it, then you've got bare metal that could be rusted underneath that Bondo. Either way. So, okay, that's why I put it over the Bondo or filler. I'm using like Evercoat Gold and Evercoat Coat. Um, and if I use some of the cheap stuff sometimes, but I've been using the Evercoat Gold and the Evercoat Z Grip because it's good stuff. And I put this over that. Now, the reason I do that is because it's going to sit for a while before I get to sanding and then surfacer over that. So because it's going to be a while and it could be outside, I used it on these cars that the ones that we're doing right now. So that was the reason I used this. Typically, if I worked on something, I would just work on it, strip it, sand it, prime it, paint it, done. And the quicker you get to that paint, the quicker that the car has sealed up surface so that it won't rust. So anyway, that's what it does. It does exactly what the label says. It actually has a decent surfacer. So when I sanded this thing, this stuff, I did notice that it did surface pretty well. I didn't expect it to be like a regular DTM 2K urethane primer, but it wasn't that far off. I'm going to say it wasn't near as good, but it wasn't that far off of that. So it actually worked pretty well. So if you're looking for something similar to what I'm doing, which is strip, sand, do your body work, primer, and then that panel sits until you get back to it because you're working the whole car that way. This would be a decent product for that. I don't know. It probably would be good if you're doing it the other way too, where you're just going to take the whole car down and have it sandblasted, primer everything, which is not the way I typically do it. And the reason I don't do that is because once you sandblast it, now all the metal's open. Everything's open. When they built these cars, especially VWs, they went to, what they did is they did all the welding stage, and then the car got into a 40,000 gallon vat and got dipped down in there, and everything inside and out was coated with something. Okay, so when you're doing a restoration and you sandblast it, now when are you going to dip it? You're not. You just don't have that access to that. So you've changed up things. Maybe you say you have to sandblast it because it had rust or something like that, but there's other ways to deal with that with rust reformer and rust with phosphoric acid, and there's a lot of other ways to deal with that. So you don't have to do it that way. You can do it another way. So that's the way I choose a different method because of my experience with sandblasting. And I remember doing sandblasting 30 some odd years ago. Guys sandblasted everything, got all the rust out of it. He's all excited. And then we get to primer. Before we ever got to paint, we see rust coming through the primer. So, that was before epoxy prime. So now the guys, I'll use epoxy prime. Well, still the same thing happens. If you open it up, it is open. As soon as you sand it, it's open. I mean, it just tests this stuff. Go ahead, prime it with any epoxy primer, sand it, and put it outside for a week. Let it rain, and then go look at it and tell me it's not rusty, and then tell me I'm wrong. So anyway, just thought I'd get that out there. Great product. Really would highly recommend it if that's the type of thing you're trying to do.